keep on running. I keep on running. I keep on running. Running. Non-stop till they out of breath. Putting in about 1,000 reps. Addicted to the grind like a pound of meth. Schneider-Weiler, how I climb the best.
Welcome to the Football Autobiography Show. It is such a pleasure to be with you all today, wherever in the world you are listening. The Football Autobiography Show is dedicated to taking you on a football journey with football's most interesting players, coaches, trainers, staff, and journalists. Think of these as mini football autobiographies. Each guest will show you how they got where they are now, reveal their techniques for success, and what they've learned along the way. Our guest today is CEO of the Hong Kong Football Association, Mark Sutcliffe. Sutcliffe is responsible for developing football on and off the pitch in Hong Kong. Since he has taken over, Hong Kong has risen over 20 places in the FIFA rankings, and they now have 2 teams in the AFC Champions League. Before working in Hong Kong, Sutcliffe was the CEO of Strategic Leisure Limited, where he consulted sports and leisure projects for nearly 20 years. In recent years, he has developed a football center of excellence in Singapore and refurbished the National Stadium in Kiev, which was the venue for the final of the 2012 European Football Championships. In this episode, we discuss the difficulties growing the game in Hong Kong, possible FIFA reforms, the growing pains of the Hong Kong Premier League, whether financial fair play should be introduced to Asia, and how he mistakenly invited a 16-year-old blogger into his office. Without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Mark Sutcliffe. I'm here with Mark Sutcliffe, the CEO of the Hong Kong Football Association. It is such a pleasure to be with you here today.
Well, thank you very much for having me on. My pleasure.
So before we get into everything football, you have a pretty interesting bio. You were a crew member in the 2005-2006 Clipper Around the World yacht race and have climbed mountains across the UK, the Alps, the Himalayas, and are also a PADI advanced diver. What about those 3 sports do you enjoy so much?
Well, very good question. I wasn't expecting to start here. I've always enjoyed all sports, and if you look at my career, I've really just been involved in sport and nothing else, and that's because I've kind of had a lifelong interest and passion for sports, many sports. I kind of started out with team sports, but as I got a little bit older, I just seem to gravitate more towards individual sports and outdoor pursuits. And, I love the challenge physically and mentally, and like putting myself in situations where I'm challenged and a little bit pushed out of my comfort zone, probably a little bit like the Hong Kong FA, to be honest.
Well, can you, with all of those experiences, is there a particular like sailing, climbing, or diving situation that was particularly challenging, or one where you were like really scared because you were so outside of your comfort zone?
Well, I think when you put yourself in those environments, there's always I could think of issues with all 3, but just to focus on one of them, I think the round the world yacht race, the leg where we sailed from Qingdao in China across to Victoria in Canada, so that was across the North Pacific. We had 29 days at sea. We didn't see land. We didn't see another boat for that period of time. That's quite tough anyway. But then we encountered 3 storms, one of which was particularly bad, and that was quite a frightening experience because you're in the middle of nowhere. You're relying on the boat itself, which feels pretty small in that environment, and you're relying on your team members. And we were swamped by a very large wave at one stage, which knocked out most of our equipment, our GPS, our water maker, our engine, and we were pretty much, at the mercy of the elements. And that was quite a hairy experience, and one that I was glad to come through, and probably wouldn't want to repeat, to be honest.
And how did that make you feel? I mean, my aunt right now, she's been kind of sailing around the world for the last 2 or 3 years. But how did that experience of kind of being at the mercy of the elements make you feel?
Actually, it was interesting because my overriding emotion at the time was not actually fear. It was more anger. I was angry with myself for putting myself in that situation, and because it was a voluntary thing, I chose to do it. And in fact, I paid to be a member on that crew. So, I put myself in that situation, and I was angry because I didn't think I was going to die, but I thought there was a possibility. And then I was just thinking, well, what a stupid thing to do, to put yourself in that situation, and just thinking about the people that you leave behind, and how they're going to feel about it. So it was anger. I think, when you're in that situation, adrenaline tends to take over, so you don't feel particularly fearful because you've got to just carry on. There's no escape. You're there, and you just have to deal with the situation. And the good thing is that you've got other people around you who are probably feeling the same sort of thing, although you don't discuss it at the time. And so you rely on them, and you know that they have to rely on you. So basically, as I say, you have no choice. You just get on and deal with it.
So, I mean, that it sounds like it was a pretty. I mean, while you weren't scared in this situation, a pretty frightening situation. But you continue to do sports that are quite dangerous.
Yeah, I think it's like all things. You come through unscathed at the other side, and you tend to kind of forget about it, and then the positive side of these things take over, and it makes you want to do them again. So I've done quite a lot of sailing since, and other outdoor pursuits, and as I say, I like being in a challenging situation, like being part of a team. I like putting myself in a situation where I have to be challenged physically and mentally, and I don't know, maybe describe me as an adrenaline junkie. I don't know, but I just like that sort of thing. It makes a change from sitting behind a desk, and I just love being in the outdoors and in a kind of a physical situation.
You have experience developing like a football center of excellence in Singapore and the refurbishment of the national stadium in Kiev. And you said about those experiences that, quote, they have shown me what can happen when at first it looks like change is impossible. Can you choose one of those two experiences and elaborate on how change looked impossible at the time and how you were able to make it happen?
Yeah, well, the situation in Singapore is quite an interesting one. The client that I was working for at the time was actually the Singapore Armed Forces Reserve Association, and they operate a number of sports clubs, very good sports clubs across Singapore for their members. And as a consultant, I was asked to go and have a look at a particular facility and see how we could improve it and enhance it and make it a better facility for its members. And I just remember sitting overlooking this kind of green expanse, which was actually outside the boundary of this particular site. And I thought, that would just make fantastic football pitches, and then that would give another activity for the members to participate in. So I spoke to somebody at the club. I said, look, that piece of land over there, any chance of getting hold of that? They just said, no, forget it, no chance. It's government land. You'll never get planning permission, etc. So, but I thought, well, no, it's too good an opportunity to miss. So that's when I then kind of exceeded my brief a little bit and went to speak to the government. And after a lot of negotiation and discussion, there was no plans for that piece of land for at least 20 years. So we managed to get a temporary license to occupy that site and incorporated it into the particular club. And it's now been developed into a football centre of excellence with natural turf and artificial pitches. And it's a great amenity for the members of the club. So that's just a quick example. Somebody said it couldn't be done, and I decided that I wasn't going to take no for an answer.
That's incredible. The perseverance necessary, and it goes to show you, just because someone says no once doesn't mean it's a no forever at all.
That's true. Yeah, and hopefully it'll be there beyond the 20 years, because I've been back to see it, which was quite a rewarding experience. Sometimes as a consultant you don't get an opportunity to actually see the finished product, but I did go back to Singapore and saw it in operation, and saw it being used by a wide range of community and young people in particular. And I thought, this is great, and hopefully it'll prove itself, and it'll be there for a lot longer than the initial 20-year period.
That's great, getting to see the fruits of your labor. You, before we got on air on this podcast, you kind of told me what you'd been up to the last week at your job. But what is the typical work day or work week like for you as a football as the FA chief executive?
Wow, that's a good question, because there probably isn't a typical week. I know that's a bit of a cliche, but some days I'm sitting behind my desk dealing with administrative matters. I might be preparing reports for the board. I might be working with my colleagues on a new part of our strategic plan or whatever. And then I could be at a AFC meeting, the Asian Football Confederation meeting, because we're obviously part of the AFC. Could be going to a meeting involving people from FIFA. Usually involves some sort of football matches. So big thing at the moment that I'm working on is we have the Asia Trophy here in 2 weeks' time, with 4 Premier League teams coming to Hong Kong. As you can imagine, that creates a huge workload, because we've got to sort out the venues, the format of the competition, the visas for the players coming in, and then the good part about the job is that then I get to watch the matches. And as somebody who's been watching football and been passionate about football my whole life, that's kind of the best part of the job, sitting back and enjoying watching the matches. And so last week I was in Myanmar with our under-22 team, the Hong Kong representative team, and it's great to see lads, because I've been here 5 years now, so some of the lads that were playing in that competition last week are now in their early 20s, but they were young teenagers when I first started to see them. So to watch them develop and improve, and then to go out and be playing against other countries, that's a very rewarding part of the job.
You mentioned doing a lot of the administrative stuff, and the AFC meetings that you have to go to. You were just in Kuala Lumpur for the AFC meeting there. What type of football bureaucracy or management do fans not see, or not maybe fully appreciate or understand?
Well, probably a huge amount, to be honest, and I think it's good that they don't know about. They don't have to know about it. I think from a fan's perspective, all they want to do is watch their team and watch good quality football and be excited by the entertainment. They don't really need or want to know what's going on behind the scenes. But anybody that's involved in event management will know that it's sort of 95% of the work is done behind the scenes, and 5% is what is the actual showcase itself, what people actually see. And that's the same generally with the football. So if we're, for example, planning we're just launching our summer program, which is going to give kids from across the whole of the Hong Kong, the 18 districts in Hong Kong, an opportunity to receive expert tuition across the summer period. So each course will last for a fortnight, with kids coming for a couple of hours every day, but it's literally 12 months in the planning, because we've got to organise coaches, got to organise venues, and a lot of other things got to do with all the publicity, the promotion, decide on the pricing policy, get the funding in place from sponsors, etc. So there's a lot of work that goes on, and as I say, from a spectator's point of view, they don't need to know that. They just need to know if they can go and watch a match in safety and enjoy it, and just kind of soak up the atmosphere.
Yeah, I mean, fans just want to watch football, but in this podcast, I like to go a little deeper than just what we see on the surface. So you started the Premier League in 2014, the Hong Kong Premier League, and you kind of made it as a mandate for clubs to participate, they had to either have the Hong Kong Premier League license or the higher AFC Champions League license. And you said that it's not asking them to do anything other than would be expected at a professional football club. Why is it difficult for some of these clubs to achieve these relatively standard practices, or standards for that matter?
Well, I think it varies from country to country. So the meeting I was at in KL this week was actually to do with club licensing, and at that meeting there were representatives from some of the very high achieving and sophisticated footballing countries in Asia, from Japan and Korea and Australia, etc. And then there were countries that I would say Hong Kong being one of them, that are less sophisticated in terms of the footballing infrastructure. So the club license, both licenses are similar in terms of the criteria. They're just different levels. So there are criteria to achieve in terms of their sporting prowess. So that includes things like having coaches with the right level of qualification. It includes how they operate a youth academy. It includes other criteria, financial criteria, so having proper accounts in place, having a budget, having a cash flow forecast, making sure that there are player contracts in place, and making sure that the entity itself is properly constituted and a legal organization. So the actual club license itself is a very good discipline. It's a very important tool for clubs to use to make sure that they are professional. They've got effective financial management in place, and they have the right level of support in terms of their own internal departments. So they have a general manager, they have a security and safety manager. They, as I said before, they have coaches, they have proper marketing team.
But it seems like that stuff. But it seems like that stuff should be pretty, I want to say simple, but it doesn't sound that difficult to obtain. I'm just a little confused as to why that's so. A small business of 10 people, can have a lot of that basic infrastructure set up. It just seems like it shouldn't be that difficult for a lot of these clubs to get that.
It's not that difficult, but a lot of the clubs would prefer to focus their activity on what happens on the pitch. So they may be, the clubs might be founded and operated by people who don't have a business background, who maybe come from a playing background or coaching background, and so they don't have necessarily the management tools at their disposal to operate, as you say, what is in effect a business. The costs of applying some of the club license things, they're not insignificant. So, if you want to attain a AFC Champions League club license, you've got to operate a youth academy at 3 different age groups. So that's having a lot of kids playing, which is quite expensive because you have to pay for the coaches and the facilities and so on. So, we introduced the club license as a means of professionalizing football in Hong Kong, but a lot of the clubs did find it difficult to adjust. And we had a little bit of resistance at the start to the club license because, basically the clubs want to turn up, they want to play football, and they want to put all of their money into the players who are on the pitch, because that's where they feel that they will, get a return on that investment.
And so to talk a little bit about how the league, or how a lot of your work in Hong Kong is doing, you mentioned, before this interview, I read extensively your blog, which is spectacular and a good insight into Hong Kong, and I recommend everyone out there reading it. But you said that I think it's time to face facts and understand that the evolutionary approach needs to be replaced by a more revolutionary approach. You only have to look at what is being done across the border to see what is possible to do if there is support from all stakeholders, including the government, commercial, corporate sector, clubs, fans, media, and yes, the Football Association too. So what revolutionary approaches can you make to improve the situation of football in Hong Kong.
Okay. We get a lot of support from the government for what we're doing in terms of football development generally, but there is a reluctance, which I can fully understand, on the part of our public sector partners to invest in the professional side of football in Hong Kong, because they don't see that necessarily as what they should be doing. They don't think they should be putting money into what are, in effect, private sector entities. But that has happened in other countries. It happens in the Middle East. It happens in East Asia as well, where governments are more supportive in terms of the resources they will put into the professional level. And in Hong Kong, we haven't done that. So when the J-League started, for example, over 20 years in Japan, there was a partnership basically between the clubs, between the private sector industry and the government. So the government gave the industrial partners tax incentives to invest in football, and the government themselves supported that through district and provincial funding. So actually, all the money that we've had from the government has gone into other aspects of the work that we do. It goes into women's football, it goes into youth development, it goes into coach education. I think that we need a more interventionist approach now in terms of the professional game, because if we don't do that, we're in danger of kind of just stagnating a little bit, and if not going backwards in terms of the professional. So I'd like to see more tax incentives for companies to invest in football. I'd like to see the legalization of gambling on football betting and a proportion of that money going back into the clubs. We're criticised by our clubs for not being able to give them enough resources for them to develop, and I have some sympathy with that point of view. But we don't have the resources, and we don't have the ability to use either corporate or government funding to help to build up our club infrastructure and network.
And how can you kind of liaise with the government to get some of those desires met?
Well, the good thing is that there is a forum for these discussions to take place, because when we wrote the original strategic plan for football in Hong Kong, we established a football task force, which is managed by the government, but it involves independent people. So the football task force is the forum where these issues should be discussed. They've been raised tentatively in the past, and kind of it's just sitting in the tray marked too difficult to deal with at the moment, because we wanted to try this evolutionary approach of trying to develop the Hong Kong Premier League through its own means, through trying to entice more revenue from broadcasting, through getting more gate receipts from people through the door. Now, these things and getting commercial sponsorship. Some of those things have worked, some of them haven't. And I think now, having been involved in it at a more detailed level for the last 5 years, I'm coming to the conclusion that now we need to be much more radical in terms of how we try and develop professional football in Hong Kong, because we need a strong professional league to create good quality players to represent Hong Kong. If we get a good, successful representative team, that will further encourage more investment. So we're trying to create a virtuous circle here, and we need to we've tried to do it in a kind of a softly approach. It's worked to some extent, but if we're going to compete with other countries, and certainly if we're going to be competitive with what's happening over the border in China, we've got to be much more radical in the way we approach things.
Well, speaking of radical change, you said in an interview I read that, or maybe it was the blog, that, quote, "We recently tried to introduce a minor change to the substitutions allowed in our youth leagues, and there was nearly a mutiny. The Belgian case study shows that what can be achieved, but also how long it takes. It seems that you have to win hearts and minds before you can win football matches." You're referring to like the Belgium case study of how they kind of changed their whole football approach and have been so successful and created their golden generation. So, have there been any other examples of changes that have had significant resistance that you've tried to make?
I think there's been kind of some skepticism are a number of things, and certainly we've just been talking about the introduction of the club licensing. There was some certainly some concerns about that. We're recently having discussions about changing the format of our youth league and to make it a bit more of a meritocracy, and so subdivide into divisions where the best teams are playing against the best teams. We also had a little bit of resistance to the introduction of small-sided games for younger players. What we've done in Hong Kong is we've brought in external expertise, not just myself from the UK, but we've got people from Spain, we've had people from Australia, we've got people from Japan and Korea. And so what we're trying to do is pick the best of different ways of developing players. But in all walks of life, if you're trying to introduce change, there's always going to be a little bit of resistance, and people say, "Oh, well, we don't do it that way here." And I think it's natural that when new football cultures are introduced into a place, that there'll naturally be a little bit of resistance. So we have found that. I think we need to carry on and very clear in terms of what our goals and our strategy is, and eventually, hopefully, the results will start to improve, and then people will think, okay, maybe these guys do know what they're talking about. Let's just go along a little bit more with the changes that they're introducing, because the point about the Belgium situation is that it takes probably 10 years for a system to change and for the results to come to fruition, because that's how long it takes to develop a young player. So we've got players now who, the guys that I was watching last week, the golden age for their learning to play football is probably when they're between 6 years old and 12 years old. Well, that particular cohort of players, if you take it back to when they were 6 and 12, we didn't have systematic methodologies for teaching and training young players. So they're suffering, and you can see that on the pitch now. They're trying very hard, they're improving, but they're not as technically competent as players from other countries.
Yeah, I mean, it starts when they're really young, so you won't start seeing the results for another 5 years or possibly even more. But no, I was just interested because I was talking to Mads Davidson. He's the technical director at Shanghai SIPG, and he was kind of we were discussing how you have to change, but also be respectful of like some of the traditions and customs, and how difficult it can be to do that, to toe that line.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I go along with that, and you simply also, you can't just helicopter in from a different place a system and put it into Hong Kong or any other place for that matter. So what we've done, as I say, in developing our football curriculum, we've taken the basis of what happens and what's happened in Hong Kong, what will work, what won't work, and we've overlaid on top of that, the best practice from other countries, and hopefully we've ended up with a system and a structure that will take in the best of both worlds, and will be acceptable to the local culture, but will take advantage of what works in other places within the local context, and that will help over a period of time to strengthen player development.
And so when you're evaluating, player development or some of these other important things, what are some figures or indicators that you regularly track that you have your staff pass on to you?
Well, there's a number of kind of benchmarks that we can use. Obviously, the results on the pitch matter. So it's black and white. You can't hide. The results are what they are. So whether we've qualified for certain tournaments at different age groups would be one benchmark, and the rankings that we are given by both the AFC and FIFA. And then you can bring it down to a more individual level, and we can track the technical ability of our players. We can track the physicality of our players, and that's one thing that we do need to work on, and we have been working on in Hong Kong. People from Asia are physically different from in some other continents, and we suffer here because young players don't have an opportunity to play as frequently as in other countries. So they're not training with the same frequency and intensity, and therefore their levels of physicality are quite low in comparison. So, we're trying to improve that, and it's very easy to measure and benchmark yourselves with certain. There are standardized physical tests that we will apply at different age groups, and we will continue to do that and to continue to see how we're improving in relation to and proportionally to other kids from other countries.
It's interesting you say that. So when you're giving these physical fitness tests, I think of like kind of the like beep tests or like a mile test. What are you? Is it that these because they aren't as active as other kids from other continents? Is it they're just not as the stamina is not there, or is it the speed and explosiveness, or what?
Well, it's actually across the board, and it's interesting because when I first came to Hong Kong, people were telling me, how fast and agile local people were, and you kind of intuitively think, yeah, that's probably right. But then, in conjunction with the Hong Kong Jockey Club, we actually did a scientific study, and we compared the results of players from certain age groups in Hong Kong and compared them with players from the UK. And actually, we found that in all of the parameters, we were probably 10 to, in some cases, 30% lower than the benchmarks for players from the UK in terms of speed, agility, endurance, and the other factors. So that gave us a starting point, and that's what we're measuring ourselves against now and trying to improve that. But it's basically a factor of life in Hong Kong. I'll give you a quick example. There are one pitch for every 100,000 people in Hong Kong. In the UK, it's one pitch for every 2,000 people. So there's 50 times more pitches, 50 times more opportunities for kids to play football in the UK than there is in Hong Kong. And kids in Hong Kong tend to live in high-rise buildings, very little space. We only have 75 11-a-side pitches for 7.5 million people. So it's the opportunity to play which is the problem. I don't think it's their innate, ability and the natural physique. I just think it's a lack of opportunity, and perhaps in some cases a lack of understanding of the level of work that you need to put in to get a good result out.
I'm happy you mentioned the facilities, because when I was kind of reading about Hong Kong football, that was the first thing that jumped out, because it's not, as far as I know, it's not a problem I've really seen in any other country in the world. I mean, most other places, there's always enough space. It's pretty rare that there's something else that's like Hong Kong. I mean, if you go to metropolitan cities, of course, across the world, there are similar problems, but not countrywide problems of such. So how have you tried to overcome that problem and maximize the little space that you do have?
Yeah, you're right. In terms of population density, it's probably one of the most densely populated places in the world. In terms of the value of real estate, it's certainly the most expensive part in the world. So, we just don't have the space, and if there is a space available, then it's going to be used for something else. So lack of facilities is our biggest problem. So we can only tackle certain things. One thing we have done is we've actually converted, and we're working with the government on a program of converting natural turf pitches into artificial pitches, because you can use them 20 times more frequently. So that maximizes the use of individual pitches. Also, we've now finally managed to secure a piece of land ourselves, again in partnership with the government, and we're building our own football training centre. At the moment, as we speak, it's under construction, and that will give us another 6 pitches, 3 natural turf and 3 artificial pitches. We'll have some community use, but the overriding priority for that particular centre is to develop our own high-performance players and our coaches and our referees. So this is going to kind of give us a quantum leap forward, if you like, because for the first time ever, we'll have our own dedicated facilities. So at the moment, our senior team, and don't forget we're competing against countries like China in World Cup qualifiers. Our senior team at the moment don't have a dedicated pitch to train on. So one week they can be training on an artificial pitch in one part of Hong Kong, and the next day they're training on the grass pitch and probably a poor quality grass pitch somewhere else. So yeah, facilities is certainly one of the factors that's held back the development of football in Hong Kong.
And I noticed you when you were talking about the end of the Premier League season that you remarked in a game about Eastern and Kitchee, two of the biggest clubs in the league, that there was the usual time wasting, feigning injury, brandishing imaginary yellow cards, dissent on the pitch and from the dugout, and that it was pathetic and embarrassing and ruining the game. Obviously, those are problems that are in every league, but you're one of the few people that actually gets to govern a bit to a degree the league. So in either a hypothetical world or theoretical world or practical, how would you go about abolishing some of these tactics, and what would the reform process be like?
Well, I think that we can do some things at a local level, and which we do try. So at the start of every season, we bring all of the clubs in and we give them a briefing. We tell them about any changes to the laws. We explain to them how we're going to deal with potential match manipulation. We deal with a lot of issues, drug testing and so on. And one thing that we always do at the start of the season is try and reinforce to the players and the coaches about good behaviour and respect on the pitch. So we can do that to some extent, but as you say, it's unfortunately a characteristic of football. Not just football, you see these sort of things in other sports as well. And I just personally find it, as you can tell from the blog and those outspoken words, I just find it a little bit frustrating, because I think people pay good money to watch football and they expect to see football rather than people rolling around on the pitch. So we can do things locally, but I think FIFA have realised this, and there are a number of things that are being discussed at the moment which could be introduced internationally, which will help to improve. So there's discussion at the moment about, for example, having a clock system as they do for basketball and other sports, so the clock stops if the game stops, and that would at a stroke stop any issues about time wasting, for example. I think the new assistant video referee system, where you can check whether a player has dived in the penalty area, etc. So I think we can address things locally, and football needs to get its house in order internationally as well. I think it will happen because football is the world's most popular sport, but it's competing with other forms of entertainment as well, and so people will eventually get too fed up, I think, with some of the things that they see on the pitch at the moment.
And how do you feel about the clock stopping specific? That and the video referee. Are you in favor of those changes? Possible changes?
I wasn't in favor of too much interference from technology initially, because I thought that was going to destroy the flow of the game. But I think if it's used in the right circumstances and it's used when the game has stopped and it's not, the analysis is not too protracted, then I think it can be a good thing. I think the goal line technology, for example, has been good. And I've seen in recent tournaments where they've been kind of road testing the assistant video referee, it's worked quite well. Still room for improvement. So I think if it is used sparingly, used in the right circumstances, then I think it's a good thing. As regards to the clock, the other thing that worried me slightly when I was reading about this is that they said that the game is going to be a 60-minute game. So that implies at the moment that actually out of 90 minutes, the ball's not actually in play for more than 60 minutes. So there's a lot of time wasting or a lot of inactivity at the moment. So I think in principle It's not a bad idea. It works in other sports. Works very well in rugby. And another thing that obviously in rugby, the game's not over until the ball goes out. Sometimes we see in football it's a bit frustrating because you could have a good attack building and then the referee will blow the final whistle. So I think there's things do need to change. Things are changing, and I would support the use of some of the technological developments that are being trialed at the moment.
No, it's actually interesting that you mentioned that they can't stop until they put it out of play. I didn't know that rule in rugby, but that's actually that would be an interesting little small wrinkle. Is if the game couldn't end until the ball had been put out of play, or maybe there was some sort of foul or something. But that would be really interesting. I'm totally in favor of the clock stopping because it just sometimes can feel like even less than 60 minutes in a game, or even football. But you mentioned in an email to me that you were passionate about player development, women's coaches, women's football, coaches education, and refereeing. And we mentioned VAR just a moment ago. Is there any other way that you feel that referees or systems that can be put in place to improve refereeing?
On a general point, I feel very strongly about refereeing because, and I see it here all the time, referees get a really bad press. They get criticised by fans, by the media, by coaches, by owners, and they do an incredible job. And without referees, we wouldn't have a game of football. When people complain about referees to me, I say, when was the last time you did it? And perhaps you should get out on the pitch and try it yourself before complaining. We need referees, and we need to give them all the encouragement that they can get. At the end of the day, they're only human. Saw some analysis the other day where they're making 3 or 4 decisions every minute. So if you multiply that by 90, they're actually making a lot of decisions, probably 100 times more decisions than a footballer will make on the pitch in a comparative period of time. So we do need to cut the referees a little bit more slack. They will make mistakes, because, as I say, they're only human. I think again, something that I've thought as a good crossover from rugby is the sin bin. I think 10 minutes cooling down period for a yellow card or a second yellow card rather than a sending off or something. I think we need to give the referees a little bit more power. They tried the 10-yard rule in football; it didn't work. Not in favour of that, but I think there are things that we can do to make life easier for a referee. I wouldn't be surprised in 20 years' time if we don't see 2 referees on the pitch. I know at the moment we have 1 referee, 2 assistant referees, and in some cases 2 additional referees on the goal line. But I wouldn't be surprised because of the distances and the speed of the game and everything's increasing in it all the time. Wouldn't be at all surprised to see more than 1 referee on the pitch at some stage in the future.
Yeah, I know in American sports and in basketball, for a while they only had 2 referees, and then they changed it to 3. And at first, people were like, "We don't need a 3rd referee," and there was some outcry. And then, before everyone knew it, no one cared, and that could easily be the case in football.
Yeah, I'm sure. You go back to the early days of football, there was no referee on the pitch. And there was a person nominated from each team to be the adjudicator, and so you started out with no referee.
Really?
And then there was 1 referee. And then there was a referee who wasn't on the pitch, and it's only I say relatively in the last century that they've actually had referees on the pitch, and referees off the pitch to help the referee who's actually on the pitch. So it would just be another evolution, to be honest, to move to 2 referees.
Wait. When was this? When was the most recent time that it was just 2 an educator from each team? What is this, like the 1920s or 30s or?
No, I think it was before then. Even it was before then.
Okay.
Even we're talking about in the very, very early development stages of football.
Okay. So I read that you believe that football needs to be part of a nation's DNA, and it seems that in Hong Kong, football is part of the DNA, but it's not Hong Kong football, it's European football. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, if that's a correct assessment.
Well, in terms of watching, definitely. I mean, in terms of participation, there's a lot of people playing football in Hong Kong. I think the last time a study was carried out, there was 300,000 males, which is 10% of the male population, more or less, 8%, playing football on a regular basis. Mainly seven-a-side on hard courts because we lack the facilities. So there's a lot of interest in participation. When it comes to watching, it's frustrating for me that we don't get bigger crowds at our Premier League games. And people keep reminding me, and it gets a bit irritating, of the so-called glory days of Hong Kong football in the 70s and 80s, where they would regularly get 20,000 people turning up at a match. But in those days, you couldn't watch football on the television. And obviously the English Premier League and some of the other leagues now, if you want to watch good quality football, you can do it from the comfort of your own home, and you can watch 3 games consecutively. The standard of football is obviously a lot higher than it is in Hong Kong. So football, as you say, it is part of the DNA in terms of participation, but not in terms of spectating at a local level. And that's part of our job at the FA, to make it a better spectacle, to improve the quality, to improve the overall spectator experience. We've still got quite a long way to go in that respect.
And have you discussed with other FA executives from other countries about this issue of maybe lowered domestic turnout or fans watching games? And what have those discussions been like with other football executives that have similar problems?
I can't recall specific discussions, and a lot of the countries that are in Asia actually don't seem to have the same problem. So
really?
There's a new league in the Philippines and Thailand, and their spectators and numbers are very high. Similarly in Japan and Korea, very, very good attendances. I'm sure there are other countries that are similar to Hong Kong, but I've not actually specifically discussed that. We're trying to work on it ourselves through helping the clubs with their fan engagement, through more marketing, and ultimately, it's about demand, and we have to have a product which is good enough to attract local people. At the moment, that product, we have to admit, because the numbers are not there, we have to admit that we haven't got the product right, and that's what we need to work on.
I'm very surprised to hear you say that, just because I used to live in Korea for 2 years, and it definitely seemed like it was a similar problem there. Because when I went to some games and when I watched it on TV, it seemed like hardly anyone was there, and there didn't seem to be any interest aside from the Premier League. So it's interesting that you say that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I've been to a couple of games in Korea myself. Admittedly, they were kind of towards the end of the season where there was a lot to play for. But the crowds that I've witnessed there have always been quite big and very passionate and vociferous. Yeah.
No, well, they're definitely very passionate when you go, and I recommend anyone to go, because when you are there, they can get quite loud. Is there any hot button issue that football executives approach you about or try to learn from you?
You're talking about executives from other countries?
From other countries.
Well, just a quick example, and the reason I was in Kuala Lumpur the last couple of days is that we're actually talking about the sustainability of clubs and whether some sort of financial fair play mechanism should be introduced into Asia. I think it's not necessarily directly relevant for Hong Kong, but in a lot of the other countries, particularly now in China, you see clubs that are expanding very quickly and perhaps stretching themselves beyond their means. They're very heavily reliant on one or two individuals or one sponsor, and I think there's a concern generally across the Asia and in other confederations as well, because UEFA have had similar issues in the past. So the sustainability of clubs is an issue. and it's partly driven by transfer fees and the expectations of players in terms of their salaries. So whether there should, example, be a salary cap, whether a club should be required to only spend a certain proportion of its self-generated revenue on player compensation. Those are the sort of issues that we've been talking about in the last couple of days. They're quite interesting, discussions to have, really.
And from your point of view, I'm used to salary caps in the States. I mean, the MLS, they have a salary cap. Were a lot of these people in favor of some sort of salary cap or a financial fair play, or are you?
Well, interesting. There's only one country that we're aware of in Asia that has a salary cap, and that's in football, and that's in Australia. A lot of the countries are imposing the federations, the associations are actually imposing what you would describe as financial fair play mechanisms themselves, rather than it being, an AFC-led initiative. So, for example, in Japan, if a club has more than 3 years consecutive financial losses, then they will be penalised, and there's going to be a grace period. But eventually, potentially, the club would be not allowed to participate in the league. So they're trying to kind of curb the over expansion financially, or over stretching clubs financially. We're not at that stage in Hong Kong. I want to see more investment going into the clubs. That's what we need, more money, and we need more people to take a punt and a risk on investing in football rather than the other way around. I think the conclusion was that across Asia, there's such a big difference between countries, the big sophisticated countries, the kind of evolving and developing countries, that the time's not right to have an international fair play mechanism. But at the moment, we should just leave it to individual countries and associations to identify what the issues are for them and to put in place mechanisms to do that. We all have the club license system anyway, so if you want to participate in the AFC Champions League, you have to have an AFC Champions League club license, and within that there are financial mechanisms which will already kind of make the clubs look at their own internal financial management.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense, is to keep it a little bit more local for every country in terms of financial management, and rather than some overarching financial fair play mechanism. We were talking a little bit before about how European teams are getting so big and they're so popular in Hong Kong. I was talking with James Montague, who has this book coming out about these big billionaires, and specifically like Man City, and how they have teams all around the world. Like, in New York, in the MLS, they have New York City FC, and they have various teams in various leagues. And do you ever think that there could be a Manchester City team in Hong Kong, or an Arsenal team in Hong Kong? And do you think that would be good for the league, or because you talk about investment, that would come with a lot of investment?
I think it would be a good idea if some of our existing clubs could partner with bigger clubs from Europe. For lots of different reasons. I think there will be kind of branding and opportunities, be more exciting for fans. But also think it would be a good opportunity for local people from Hong Kong to learn. We sent under 16 team 2 years ago for a week's training camp at Tottenham Hotspur as a result of a partnership that we entered into with AIA, their main sponsor. And that was a fantastic learning experience, an opportunity for our young players, not just sporting-wise, but culturally as well. I think we would, if we created a situation where coaches from a club, whichever, could come and work with our local coaches and players, and there'd be some capacity building, that would be a good initiative. I think if there'd be an opportunity for European clubs to send their young players to a league like Hong Kong to cut their teeth and gain some experience. Equally for players from Hong Kong to go and play in the reserve team, for example, in a European club. I think that would be a great opportunity. So we'd be very keen to explore that, and I think some of the European clubs would be, because they all want to be in this part of the world at the moment. We see that with the investment in China. We see it in the demand from teams coming to Hong Kong. We had Tottenham Hotspur here again a few weeks ago. In 2 weeks' time, we've got Liverpool, Leicester, West Brom, and Crystal Palace coming to Hong Kong. They see Hong Kong as a gateway into a bigger market. So I think there's huge scope for us to work much more closely with other clubs from Europe, not just England. We've had Juventus here, we've had Real Madrid here. There's a lot of interest and potential for mutual beneficial partnerships between the clubs in Europe and clubs in Hong Kong.
Yeah, no, it seems to make sense. I was I mentioned before that I had a conversation with Mads Davidson, the technical director at SIPG, and because he has this program where that's pretty new, where he sends a lot of his academy players for 6 months or even a year, I think it is, to other academies. Like he'll send like a whole group of them, for like that extended stay to another country to train there, to learn the cultural, and it's a way of opening their minds and helping them grow as well as people. And it sounded like a terrific initiative, and it seems that you would be interested at something similar in Hong Kong.
Sure, definitely. And we've had 3 of our aspiring female players at a similar situation in Japan recently, and we've got 1 female player currently on trial in Australia. So we're starting to make those connections and networks. I think it's probably the way forward.
What is your favorite book or favorite football book and favorite non-football book?
Oh, right. I've got a book that I had given to me when I was about 6, 7 years old, which is the Bobby Charlton Book of Soccer. And it's all about Bobby and Jackie when they were growing up. That was, I guess, when I was growing up in England in the late 60s and 70s. That was kind of my prized possession. Other book, I tend to read a lot of sports autobiographies, and I read one recently by Brian Moore, who is the England rugby hooker, and it was a fascinating and inspirational read. He is a very interesting character and been through a lot of personal issues. I just found it a very motivating book and a very inspiring book.
It seems like you're really into to rugby. Was that your first love, or?
No, I'm a jack of all trades and master of none. I've kind of done a lot of work in football and obviously ended up working in football. But I'll watch most sports. I do enjoy the rugby. We're in the middle of a very exciting Lions series. When they were here in 2013, I went to Australia twice to watch the Lions play. I think it's a great sport, and as I said before, there's things that football can learn from rugby, and probably vice versa.
Yeah, I mean, it's been all the talk of the town, the Lions and All Blacks series. I was just talking about it last night here in London with some Irish lads. Who are some of the leaders you look up to or draw inspiration from?
If we're talking about sport, I would have to say that one of the people that I think has done a great job, although he's under a bit of pressure at the moment, is Sebastian Coe. I respected him highly as an athlete, and then since then, obviously, he did a brilliant job with the London Olympics. when everybody said it was going to be a disaster, everybody said it was going to fail. But he backed himself, and he did an excellent job in delivering that particular event, which many people will say is one of the best Olympics there's been for a long time. Now he's got a very difficult job as the head of the International Athletics Federation, but I kind of think he'll battle through the current challenges, and then hopefully it'll come out much better in the future.
And wait, can you spell his last name? Sebastian Coe.
Coe, C-O-E.
Okay.
So, I think he's Lord Sebastian Coe. So he was the 800 and 1500 meter. I think he won the Olympics in 1980 and 1984.
Oh wow!
So
okay.
So we're going back a little bit. We're going back quite some time when he was actually competing and breaking world records regularly. But he then went into politics and is now in sports administration. And he was the chairman of the London Olympic Committee, organising committee.
Is there something specific about him, though, that, he put on a great Olympics, but is there something about his personality or just his character that really inspires you or you look up to? Or
I just think, what I was first struck by was his just phenomenal talent. I was lucky enough to see him break the indoor world 800 meters, that broke the world record in 1981, and it was breathtaking. I've never seen anybody be so dominant in any particular event, and the speed with which he was running was phenomenal. And then he moved up not just one gear but 3 gears and destroyed the rest of the field. I have to say that was physically probably one of the most impressive things I've ever seen. And so I've kind of just followed his career since then. I was impressed with him as an athlete and impressed with him as a sports administrator as well.
I mean, at some point, I really want to make it to a track and field event because it seems just incredible and incredibly unique as well. Yeah, I mean, I was lucky enough to go to the Olympics in London, and if you watch, somebody like Usain Bolt or something, it just makes the hair stand up on the back of your neck because these guys are just so phenomenal. Another hero of mine going back a very long time was Mark Spitz, the swimmer who won 7 gold medals in one Olympic Games. We have Steve Redgrave, Sir Steve Redgrave, the rower from Great Britain. So, I have lots of kind of heroes from different sports, but I guess they're all similar in that their dedication to what they do is second to none. Their work rate. These guys make it look easy, but what underpins it is just huge amounts of dedication. How difficult is it to conduct business in Asia as a non-Asian, or in the Asian Football Confederation?
Well, for me, I was quite lucky when I came into this job in that I'd been working as a consultant in Hong Kong on and off for the previous 3 years, and I actually wrote the government's football development strategy and the Project Phoenix, which was the strategy to reinvigorate the Hong Kong Football Association. So during that 3-year period, I kind of got to know people and understood the culture a little bit more, so I had an advantage when I came in. In a place like Hong Kong, it's not too difficult because the culture is quite similar because of the colonial background of Hong Kong. The law is the same as it is basically in the UK. The language, most people in Hong Kong speak English, so that was easy. So once you understand the culture, it's not too difficult to get the respect of people as long as you work hard and you do what you say you're going to do and you're trustworthy. Then I think it's okay. I can't speak for other parts of Asia because I haven't worked there full time. I've worked as a consultant in a couple of places like Singapore. That was fine as well. So all my experiences that I've had of working in Asia so far have been very positive.
But when you're at when you were in Kuala Lumpur, I mean for the AFC meetings recently, or just, when you're with, different executives from all the other different countries at meeting for these? Is it difficult? I mean, because
I wouldn't say it's difficult now, because again, I think most people come from similar backgrounds. Most people are working in football because they love football. They want to see football improve. So we've all got similar interests, values, and ambitions. So it's all about helping to develop the sport. And again, I'm very fortunate because, and it does seem a little bit strange to me, but that all of the meetings that I've been to in both FIFA and the AFC are conducted in English, even though it's not obviously the mother tongue of most of the people who are attending the meeting. So, maybe that puts me at an advantage. I don't know, but it certainly makes life easier for me when I'm attending the meetings.
Definitely, I would imagine so. You something I mentioned earlier is and many times was your blog that you have, which I once again want to say how I think just incredible it is. I wish all FAs had their CEOs do a blog similarly. And my favorite part about it is that in the comments, you have fans write in the comments, and then you will respond to their comment, which is I just think is fantastic. And you've been doing it for 4 years now. Have you ever read a comment that really made you think or led you to propose something in a board meeting or initiated change?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, I didn't think it was that unusual. I thought a lot of companies and CEOs these days kind of try and engage with the people through a blog. It was one of the first things I thought I needed to do when I came here to, demonstrate that we're not working in isolation and we want to communicate and hear from the stakeholders of football. I've been actually very pleased with the response. If you look, some of the blogs have had over 30 comments back, I think, which it's not a huge number, but I always read them and I always reply individually to each one. One of them actually I invited into my office because he came up with so many good ideas. I thought, I've got to meet this guy and show him a little bit of respect. And when he came into my office, he was 16 years old. I couldn't believe it. But it just shows, the level of knowledge and interest in local football is there. There's been quite a few examples of where somebody's made a suggestion, particularly around the marketing and the media side. So which we've tried to do. So setting up I think one example was just a simple thing like having a mailing list and sending out a regular newsletter with news and information. So we do try and listen, and I've had some entertaining comments. I've had comments that I don't agree with. I've had comments that I do agree with, but I think it's just about being open and being prepared to communicate with people, and I've always tried to do that. And if the blog is well received, then I'm delighted.
And what is something that most people believe that you do not, or the opposite, which is what is something that you believe that most people don't?
Very good question. Well, I think some people share the opinion that I have that the best days of Hong Kong football are ahead of us. I think most people would probably think the best days of Hong Kong football are behind us. So hopefully my position will be proved right in the future, but only time will tell.
And what do you want your football legacy to be?
Well, I only have one kind of ambition for football at the moment, and that does relate to. Sorry, I've got two. So the first one relates to Hong Kong football. I'd like Hong Kong football to be seen to have kind of surpassed the so-called glory days in terms of the actual success on the pitch. I'd like to see Hong Kong at some stage in the future certainly qualify for the Asian Cup. We're participating in the qualifying rounds now. I think it's going to be difficult this time because we were given quite a difficult draw, but certainly in the future. I see no reason why we couldn't qualify for the Asian Cup and have some success in that tournament. So being one of the not necessarily the top, but being certainly in the top 25% of countries in Asia would be a legacy that I'd be happy with. The second thing is, on a personal note, I'd like to see Liverpool winning the Champions League again.
I like the sound of that. I'm a Liverpool fan as well, so that would
very good.
That would be fantastic. I share that. Are you from Liverpool?
I grew up in a place called Southport, which is about 20 miles north of Liverpool. So I used to go and watch Liverpool with a friend of mine in the 1970s. So that I would, although obviously Everton is a similar distance away from where I grew up, but in those days Liverpool were by far the better team, and so I've had an affinity with them, for a long time.
Yeah, the golden age of Liverpool, the 70s.
Exactly. Yeah.
Is there anything that do you have any requests for the listeners, or is there anything you'd like to promote?
No, I would just like to say that I think we're very fortunate to have an interest in football, world's most popular sport, sometimes the world's most beautiful sport. If you again, read my blog, I've said that in there there's the good, the bad, and the ugly of football. I think we all have a duty, for those of us that are involved in football in any way, shape or form, whether it's through the media or as a spectator or an administrator or player, whatever. We all have a responsibility to make sure that football upholds the highest standards of integrity, and that we constantly look to improve the sport, and also use the sport as a tool to improve people's lives, and to just create something that it takes you out of the normal day-to-day work that you do, gives you something that you look forward to. And as I said before, I've got friends who I've played football with as a youngster who are still my friends now, and I think we should use football as a tool for social improvement as well.
I couldn't put it any better myself. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it, and I'm sure the audience did as well.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to the show. If you enjoyed it, subscribe to it on iTunes, Stitcher, Podcast Addict, Acast, or any podcasting catching app. Want to learn more about the guests and go behind the scenes? Then go to my website, www.footbalautobiography.com, and subscribe to my newsletter. Also, if you like the show, or even if you hated it, leave a comment on either my Twitter page @footballautobio or my Facebook page, The Football Autobiography Show. I welcome and would appreciate any feedback from you all. Thanks for listening. Take care.